All right, we're broadcasting live from Austin, Texas, and it is Wednesday, July 14th, 2021. It is almost the end of July. It is going very fast. Lots of updates for you all today. We have a great guest, and we have our always Dr. John Butler and Llewelyn King on deck. Let me go to John right now, who is going to improvise for all of us without his guitar and give us a little tune to get in the mood of talking about digital transformation.
How you doing? I see trees of green, clouds of white, the bright blessed days and the dark sacred night. And I say to myself, what a beautiful world. How you doing, sir? I'm sitting here.
Oh man, that's pretty good, Johnny. That's pretty good.
Thank you, sir. I've been working with entrepreneur firms about how to bring their workers back to the workplace. And I was driving from Baton Rouge, and I stopped so I could make Digital Roundtable. So it's good to see you. Everything is going good. It's a great day in Austin, Texas.
Excellent, excellent, John. Thanks for being with us. Llewelyn, how are you, sir?
I'm superb, thank you very much. I would just mention, John, it may be a great day in Austin, Texas, but not if you're a Democrat.
Well, the Democrats are going to be in jail fairly soon here.
Well, you know, in Texas, we usually don't get on private planes and run away from problems. Understand?
I don't know about that. I don't know about that at all. I think
remember that we're all libertarians here in Texas, and wherever the money goes, we choose what department we're in, whether we're Democrat or Republican.
which would, given the poverty in Texas, would make it a totally democratic state.
Well, we don't call it poverty. We call it people making a living and moving up.
Challenged people.
Challenged.
All right. Well, let me say hi to Michael Adeeko. And Michael, how are you, sir?
Doing well, thank you. Proud to be among this august body of panelists here today.
Oh, we're glad that you're joining us. Michael happens to be the managing director, VP of training at Direct Line to Compliance. Direct Line to Compliance happens to be a Texas State CIEDAR Consortium member, and more of that, a little bit about that. Michael is a regulatory compliance auditor with over 20 years of extensive experience in the power and energy sectors. He has acquired extensive infrastructural technology expertise in electric power, energy trading, risk management, and IT cybersecurity. We want to hear from him about some of the things that he's working on in clients, his partnership with Texas State and CIEDAR. And also point out that Michael has a degree, be a Bachelor of Science degrees in Communications and Geology from Texas Southern University, DTSU, and the University of Texas at Austin, respectively. So you know, here goes another Longhorn, John Butler. What's with that? We so many Longhorns.
Well, you know, we have lots of Longhorns here in the state of Texas. What we do at the University of Texas changes the world. Along, I might add, with Texas State is doing a great job as it migrates into the world of big time. And you know, it's a certain spirit that we like to have, a spirit that understands that we must make, as my new motto is, we must make America, Texas great. So I think that the Longhorns are running wild.
And I've got two daughters joining the Longhorn fray as well, right out of my pocket. So that's great.
Llewelyn, I'm curious before we get into our day of discussion here, but did I just hear Butler give us a slogan for his running campaign?
I heard him promote a slogan, but I'm not sure that it would be widely or enthusiastically adopted outside of the small circle in which he.
But wait a minute! I thought you were his campaign manager.
We haven't got a contract yet. I could change my mind totally if the contract were favorable.
This
What do
is
you-
good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, all right. Well, let me jump in. Let me jump in into where things are at. So it seems like there has been a slightly blip in the COVID radar screen due to the 4th of July mayhem. Apparently, a lot of people were touching each other too much and other things. And so the numbers are kind of trending up a little bit instead of trending down. Nothing significant. I mean, I hope that we continue to get things under control. I am concerned that vaccinations are kind of hitting a plateau, and we have only vaccinated about 170 million people out of the 340. So there seems to be a significant number of people not vaccinated. The stock market continues to, trend slightly up, kind of sideways, but it's looking, reasonably fine. The economy is looking reasonably okay. The price of crude oil kind of stabilized around $75 per barrel, which is fairly high. 6 months ago, it was trading at 35. So is double in price. And then the gallon of gas in the Austin metro, it's 269, no change from last week. Seems to be stabilizing around that number. So maybe things are, we're taking a summer pause here. Things are stabilizing and we're moving forward. John, where are we?
Well, I think we're right in the middle of the recovery. And when we think of recovery, we think of going from one point to another point. And within that recovery, I've always said that these things are now interrelated. Just as the virus was related to unemployment, coming back is also related to unemployment. And the process of coming back is related to the whole idea of the virus. So in unprecedented kinds of times, we have now connected the virus with companies coming back to work. We will entertain 50,000 students here at the University of Texas in a short while. We don't know what percentage would have received their vaccine. So all of a sudden, we're back to the virus itself, not necessarily dictating what we do, but it's certainly at the very, very center of how we think about the economy. So it's interesting, whereas the virus took the economy away, what we don't do will not help the economy come back. I think the stock market will continue to thrive as people are looking where to put their money. As interest rates increase, of course, people look to get out of the stock market and do something else with their money. But the big thing here in Texas is that there are tons of companies moving to Texas, and no company is bringing their own electricity with them. So we have lots and lots of issues to look at, but it's all wrapped, Andres, around the economy and how we take the science of vaccines and bring the economy back. And of course, the big issue, like I've been dealing with all day, is how do we get people to come back to work? So I've been working this morning with a company that has all kinds of contracts coming in, but no workers to perform them. So we're in unprecedented things. There's a lot of movement across the United States of America. The economy is juggling along. The gig economy is juggling along, where lots of people do not want to come back to the gig economy. We are in interesting times.
Yeah, I agree. Llewelyn?
Well, I can agree with the silver-tongued orator, Johnny, on the matter that we live in interesting times, but after that, our views might diverge somewhat. I think we're in a very critical time and a very dangerous time. We have three large factors driving inflation: the heat and drought in the West, which is drying up the supply of food, hence we're paying more for food. We have the OPEC orchestrated price of oil, the $75 that Andres referred to. which is driving inflation. And we have this extraordinary situation that so many of us have decided we didn't like the life we were living before the pandemic, and we're not going back to those jobs. We're going to change our luck, which is very exciting and which will have very positive fallout later. But initially, it adds to inflation because employers are offering more and more money. I think I mentioned last week on this program, I'm listed for a job on various billboards because I'm a journalist and I want to see what the market looked like. And poor old FedEx, it's offering $12.75 a market, and it's desperate because for the same kind of work, people are getting $20 and in some cases $30 an hour. Wages are going up and that's inflationary, although I salute people who get more money if the money has any purchasing power when they get it. But the big thing to me, the big fascinating thing, is the tranche of workers who said, basically, after they had been laid off or forced to stay home, you know, I didn't like what I was doing. This is not how I want to live my life. There is no value in my day. I want more value in my day. This is my life. I want it to change. And the easiest and quickest way to change is either geographical movement, but that can be very complicated, particularly because of the housing market, or job movement. And job movement is the quick change. This is going to be very constructive down the road as we get interdisciplinary talents. Even at the lowest level, there are disciplines, there are skills. These are now going to be applied in new areas, but it's going to be hell for employers for a while.
Yeah, very true, very true.
Let me add to that. You know, it's interesting.
Go ahead, John.
It might be that offering the money is just a part of it. So in earlier days, it was the benefits that came with the job. It was full-time medical. It was a great retirement program. It was way beyond just the job. And then we went, of course, to everyone having their own 501, their own retirement program. So maybe
401k.
401k. So maybe now we're
In
saying
Texas, it may be 501.
Yeah, 401k. Yeah, it's a big heavy. You know, I have so many, but it might be right now. People are saying, "All right, I enjoyed the money, but in the gig economy, when it went south, there were no benefits.
Right.
So why not companies now think about full-time retirement, full-time medical, those things that made America great when in Detroit and what they call the Rust Belt produced the best jobs in the Western world with the best retirement systems in the Western world. And what we've done in America is allow people to go to work, and of course to fend for themselves. And everybody knows that a 401k is not a retirement plan. So maybe we're to the point where we can get back to saying, not only is you have income, but the question is, what happens to you when you don't have income? And the big lesson that we learn in the gig economy is that the things that happen to you are not good at all.
Yeah, it's a good point. Michael, you have a different perspective, perhaps, running a cybersecurity training company, and you live in Houston, Texas. You have customers all over the United States. I don't know if you're traveling, and I don't know if there are any lessons learned from you and your business around COVID, but what do you think?
Well, I'll come from a historical perspective first. And, you know, I think that Llewelyn had a good point in how you've had a change in what people want to do, and you say, I'm not going back to what I did before. Normally, though, I mean, if we look back to between 1920 and 1939, we went from the horse and buggy to the automobile. You took a picture in 1920 down a main street, and you would see horse and buggies and gas lights, and just a little while later, you'd see nothing but automobiles. Innovation took over, and it took over very, very quickly. And people said, well, on the one hand, that's terrible because the whole livery business went away and displaced all those people and all their incomes and all their lives, and this big change happened in the way people work. However, what the automobile industry did is create an extreme demand for automobile workers, which delivery workers transitioned into, therefore filling that vacuum. Here we kind of have the opposite, where it's not necessarily a huge change in innovation, but the desire of the people themselves that want to change, actually demanding innovation to bring us to this new normal that everybody is wondering about. So I think the mistake in perspective might be that we are coming back to what was. And I think that's a misnomer, because I think we are coming forward to what will be and what is. So if you're expecting things to go back and return to the good old days, if they ever were, before the pandemic, of the way things were, I think you're looking for a red herring there that will not exist, and all your predictions and all of your suppositions and weather will be out of line, misskewed, and incorrect. I think at this point, as we look forward to what will be, and what people's and what the desire of the working force is that they want to move into, the onus is upon us to spur on that innovation that is in line with what will be, as opposed to being misdirected as to what was, right?
Yeah.
So when we find these people with like with Dr. Butler over here that's saying, hey, I'm trying to help the president of LSU because nobody's coming for the staffing, nobody wants to come back to what they were, I think Dr. Butler is going to find a very hard time getting people to go back to exactly what was. And the part of the solution is that, how do we innovate? How do we retrain? How do we fill this new type of vacuum that is going to be the more productive solution to where we're going, what this new normal is, and so on and so forth. You know, seriously, the majority of people in their mid-50s to early 60s, those who were displaced with pensions and whatnot, like my parents were, and you know, we end up supporting our parents a little bit because their 401k plans and everything that we mentioned were kind of gone or seriously damaged and whatnot. You know, these folks are saying, well, absolutely, I'm now too far along in my life to go back to that. They're especially the ones. So we're missing a huge amount of experience. And this has been a problem in the power and utilities industry for quite a long time. We were wondering, well, what is going to happen when these 70, 72-year-old people that are the only ones who know how to start a city back up when it goes dark, and everybody else is scared to throw the switch, right? I've seen this happen with many of my clients. You know, they're scared to touch anything. And the only person that knows anything is 75, 78 years old and been retired, and they have to call them back. You know, now what happens? So it's really past due time that we are stepping and really leaning in to the innovative solutions that are more conducive to a little bit younger crowd. Yes, it's good to know the history of the past and the successes of the past and restore that which experience gives us. But in so doing, we also have to add the dimension of the innovation that takes us to a new normal that's conducive to the only workforce that will be returning.
Very, very good points. Very good points. I see a lot of nodding from our luminaries here. Let me switch about something, Michael. Tell us real quick, what do you all do at Direct Lines Compliance, and how are you moving forward during COVID? And then tell us a little bit about the partnership with Texas State and CIEDAR.
Sure. Direct Line Compliance is about a 12-year-old company. We started pretty much around 2006, 2007, when the NERC standards first came about. And for those who aren't directly in the power and utilities industry, NERC is a quasi-governmental organization standing for the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and they are the audit body, and they also kind of have a backup situation awareness center that backs up some government functions, which is a little bit secret. The most of what they're known about is for their audit functions. But the main deal was that we were having some blackouts on the East Coast, and the source of it being Canada and others that were causing the bulk electric system to come under a lot of fire for not being stable enough. We had an accident with the Twin Towers, which kind of brought everything to a head, and 9/11 Commission said, well, the big issue here is not that you're going to poison our water or the Super Bowl or cause everybody to go into bunkers on the Hill. It's the electric grid. We got 3 grids, and if you compromise one of those 3 grids, even Texas, for 30 days, United States of America kind of ceases to exist as a country because we haven't got stable grid. One would compromise the other. So they said, well, we've got to do something about all this compliance to keep the grid stable. So here come the NERC standards, which were kind of voluntary before, and then they became pretty much law very, very quickly. They were rushed into ratification, and people needed a whole lot of help to comply and to understand how their operations added stability to the bulk electric system. So we came into existence to help that effort, and we found a lot of people needed a lot of help, and it was kind of catch as catch can.
Right.
We decided that. Go ahead.
Let me add, because he's being too modest. What they did was a brand new technology. I have followed this company and learned from this company and learned from Micah for 8 years or so. They created a whole new algorithm that would allow compliance in different areas, in different industry, to say that I am 80% compliant, 90% compliant. That was the physics of color based on an algorithm. And that is the first time that has been. Now the pandemic has put the company a bit behind, but if Llewelyn can imagine with me, if he has a company and he were to give Micah all of his operating procedures and everything that they did, Micah could take an algorithm, put it to a certain color, and say, your company is this compliant. So to tie it in with what happened to the grid, if the grid had Micah's company, would have known that the grid was not weatherized. And you do it not just by sitting around a table, but you do it mathematically. Now, Micah, if I misspoke, then let me know.
No, not at all. Dr. Butler is actually one of my life mentors who's guided me along the way and helped channel the things that I've done over the years to a viable conclusion. He's absolutely right. We found that it was not adequate to be with all the other consulting firms out there that simply guessed or wrote opinions about whether or not you were compliant enough or whatever, or with your operations. We went further, and now I have a US patent that says, the way you write things and the way words dictate what needs to happen in operations needs to be algorithmically structured so that without a shadow of a doubt, without subjectivity, that you've reached your objective. And in this case, stability of the bulk electric system. And people say, well, that's kind of impossible. And it's like, no, it's possible enough if you start structuring the way you think to what you can prove. So as a company, basically, we ingest, as Dr. Butler said, we ingest the data, the information, the documents that indicate by specific directives that the risk has been managed for what will surprise people in taking out the bulk electric system, taking out the country, harming industry, robbing commercial and residential people of power, and make sure that these items are taken care of. And case in point, the freeze the other month basically was a missing of specific information that needed to be in a specific place, identified by standards that have been in place, and they were ignored. And why? Because you're subjectively saying, I think we're okay, I think we're going to be all right. We didn't have any problems last year, So we're going to assume that we don't have any problems this year. Instead of mandating that certain data, certain constructs must be in place, whether you have problems or not, in order to maintain a certain level of security, a certain level of continuity for the country, business as we know it themselves. I don't know how many billions of dollars have been lost based on just the loss of power, Dr. Butler, but it has been quite significant and can't be ignored. So what do? We are the ones who say quantifiably, let's determine what data needs to be in place for us to have that security, that we are solid and that we are taking care and managing our risk as we should. That's what we do as a company. And we try to take on the challenges of the times as they come.
That is enormously interesting, absolutely fascinating. But I wonder about the NERC standards themselves. I'm not a technologist, but I get phone calls almost daily from people criticizing the NERC standards, that they cause a certain false confidence. People who are in compliance may not be safe because the standards do not meet the challenge adequately, particularly when the challenge applies to hardware as opposed to software.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to take standards for what they are. I think very few people truly understand their purpose and their construction. They say, generally speaking, without specifics, put this principle in place and fill in the blanks for your organization and your operations such that you meet the terms of these principles with your own data, without any data being specified, right? And it's a standard, it's a principle that says, come up to this bar, but while we give you the standard generally, you need to tell us specifically who does it, how it is done, where it is done, when it is done, and how often, and fill in all of those blanks. But now you see you have this dichotomy between an English professor and an engineer, and ne'er the twain shall meet, right? They argue. One argues prescriptive, and the other argues operational descriptive definition. One says, if the lights are on, well, of course I have to be compliant. And the other says, I don't care if the lights are on. Have you followed the letter of the law? And have you given me data that says that it is all accounted for, right? So standards have to have this super medium in between that says, yes, but how can we manage the two? How can we say, by virtue of what has been identified by principle, can you operationally put in the data that ensures that these things stay in lockstep? And the people that complain to you, Llewelyn, so often are the ones that want to veer to one polarized opposite or the other and say it's all about prescription or it's all about operations, and it's somewhere in the middle. And the goal is to try to eliminate the subjectivity in between so that you can actually address
I
it.
might want to get lost there.
Now, Michael, one of the things that makes this difficult is, I think John Butler is frozen.
Yep.
He's frozen. One of the things that makes all this difficult that you and I have talked many times, and this was one of my discoveries of your expertise, is actually that utilities are getting audited.
Right.
And so, let alone the discussion that you just explained, right, or how you go about, just sort of executing the standard, but then somebody else with a different idea, who is an auditor, is going to come in and pretty much, so walk us through that. I mean, how does that happen? And what usually takes place in an audit? Sounds like a proctology exam.
And to most people, it is just as pleasant. When people see an auditor coming, they want to run, they want to scream, they want to play reverse psychology games. Can you not hear me?
No, John Butler is muted. So
okay,
John's
yeah,
muted.
Yeah, but people want to run when an auditor comes around, and I think there are two things happening here. One, you have to understand what an auditor's job is, and it's misunderstood. Yeah. Their job is very, very simple. It's to ensure completeness and accuracy. Just like in the financial world, it's the same in the power and utilities operational world as well. is what you are doing complete? Is what you are doing accurate by some definition? That's all they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to tell you how to run your business. They're not supposed to give you opinions on how that is to happen. But unfortunately, what happens is we always, as industry people, ask the auditor what they think. How should I run this? I just want to make you happy. I just want to give you what you want so that you're out of my way. And that's actually the wrong way to approach everything. There are not two sets of books between what we say about compliance and what we actually do in operations. They should be transparently the same and truthfully executed as they should be. I think Dr.
There is a magic word floating around the utility industry, and that is resilience.
Resilience.
Every utility executive I speak to talks about resilience. All sorts of philosophers of the electric industry say we've got to increase resilience. And on this program, people have said it is so essential that we have greater resilience, but nobody defines it. Resilience technically is a kind of ability to spring back, to recover, which suggests that you're going to tolerate blackouts if you can fix the problem fairly quickly. What does it mean to you, Michael, resilience?
Well, resilience is the ability to have, first and foremost, the right mindset about problems in and of themselves. You think about compliance and you think about preparation and you think about everything. And people come to the false conclusion that if you're properly prepared, that nothing bad will ever happen. And you also get punished accordingly. Since something bad did happen, obviously you weren't prepared enough. Okay. You have the situation in the Everglades in Florida where you have CEOs that says, we got wiped out by, a horrible hurricane, and your growth and your fauna, you allowed to grow too much. So therefore it took down lines and everything else. Therefore you didn't spend enough on cutting trees down and whatever, and then you're therefore at fault. And they make the argument, we could spend $20 million, or we could spend $60 million, or we could spend $100 million cutting down fauna, and the water would still grow to the point where we would have just as much damage. So what are you talking about? Well, what I'm saying is that, yes, you have to do a reasonable amount to be prepared, to be resilient. But at some point, acts of God will overshadow whatever you do. So the resilience part of it is, so the resilience says, yes, we need to bounce back from the worst case scenario, and we can do just that. With the understanding that we're taking some preventive measures, absolutely. And that works most of the time. But in some situations, with the freeze, I tend to argue that while the situation could have been attenuated somewhat, you would not have been able to prevent widespread damage that happened in Texas based on an unusual and an unprecedented act of God.
I agree. John, you had something?
Yeah, and what's great about you being in shop and Andres Carvalho shop is you could spread all of this knowledge and information through his shop to
We're losing you, Johnny. Using Wi-Fi on that phone.
Yes. Did you get me there?
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, what I was saying was it's a great to be in your shop at Texas State. And all of this new way of thinking that Michael brings to the table can be spread throughout in training and introduced to other companies and change how we look at the relationship between operations and other parts of the firm. And of course, we know that it's always good to have an experiment done at a university. So, Andres, I want to congratulate you for bringing Michael's firm into your shop so that his knowledge and know-how could be spread out throughout America, and we hope throughout the world.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to respond to one more point Llewelyn made, and that is the idea of compliance and resilience. I also think, and don't hate me for this, but I'm exposing the fact that compliance is also not what people think. Compliance is a question of proving that you did a reasonable amount to manage the risk that existed. All right. And you have to be able to prove that. It's one thing to say, we did not weatherize our generators at all, and we're not prepared at all. Therefore, the freeze came and did a lot of damage. You're going to get punished to the nth degree, right? To the maximum. However, if you said, no, we did do everything we could to weatherize, we followed every recommended procedure, and the same damage still happened, you have almost no liability because you were presented. Now, the end result is basically the same, right? But the compliance aspect says we can provide the data and the information that says we did that which we could do to manage the risk. Was the risk managed? Maybe yes, maybe no. Was the standard written well enough to handle the risk? Maybe yes, maybe no. But the compliance measurement says we have done what was indicated to the best of what we knew to be able to present, and then your liability is therefore greatly attenuated. You see what I'm saying? So the concept of what we do is to be able to say we do all we can where the risk is known. There's the element of known risk, and then there's the element of known risk. Nobody is ever responsible for being ready for risk that is unknown, that has never happened. That is an ex post facto type principle that you cannot be punished for that law which never existed, right? Britain got rid of all of that, or we got rid of that when we came to America. It used to be part of a British type law that the king could say, you're guilty because I said so, and I'm going to make a law that existed in the past. You can't do that, not in audit, not in any of that. So we manage the risk that we know. We improve a standard once we have new knowledge to bring the unknown risk into the known. And we try our very, very best to keep up with that. So these are consistent misnomers from everyone I've ever seen in the way of a client that thought differently about what compliance was, about what auditors do, about what risk really is, and what's the purpose to manage that risk. It's not a sham, it's not, let's put something out there so that we look like we're doing okay. If we actually try to do this thing in earnest, I think we can make a difference, and we can make some measurable type of resilience that lets us bounce back, knowing our limitations, that can do a lot, but not in all cases will everything we do be effective.
Let me pause for a moment. And share my commercial on Digital 360 Summit. So you probably know that it's coming up August 31st to September 2nd, and Michael will be there showcasing his capabilities in the new Network Operations Center, Security Operations Center's training lab that we have built for him and his team. And Llewelyn is going to be there moderating the Smart Cities panel and gracing us with his wisdom throughout the conference. And John Butler is going to be there keynote the industrial and new business models session that has a phenomenal panel following him after he inspires them on what the future holds. We're looking forward to it. I want to share for the first time live that this is our humble set of companies speaking. I'm happy to report that we have keynotes and sponsorships from Amazon and others. We got keynotes from Brownsville and Tesla and Schneider and AMD and Brick and Mortar and EPRI and Itron and Texas State and Texas and Anterix. And then you can see all these other beautiful companies that are doing phenomenal work in digital transformation in the different sectors of mobility and energy and water and infrastructure and so on. We got, Colonel, the Chief Operating Officer of AFWorks, which is a new innovation branch of the Air Force. We got all kinds of folks from all over spending with us. So we're expecting it's roughly 700 folks joining us face-to-face. San Marcos. So if you need more information on that, ping me. address at 512cg.com. And I want to thank Texas State University for sponsoring our roundtable. Now, Michael, a couple of things that I want to ask you real quick. Explain to us, the importance, and again, this is me giving you a softball because, we're part of this with Texas State and all that, but how do you envision the training and what's new about the training methodology that we have developed, that your team has developed, that is going to be exemplifying that new training lab that we built? Give us a couple of minutes of that. What's so different about it? Why is it world class? How engaging is the training? What goes on in a session?
Well, on the engagement part, when I reached out to some of my mentors, they said, Michael, the main thing you have to do with people in the power and utilities industry is endeavor to the best of your ability not to put them to sleep. And and that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring innovation, the newest ways to come to church and really get the message, take it back to your organization, and be able to do things, as we mentioned before, in a holistic and multidimensional manner that takes into account that you have possibly younger management, newer ideas, but also bringing back the depth of experience that training can do if it's done well.
Mm-hmm.
I've made the argument that you can either tribally osmose information by routine practice to an operational group and slowly get them along the way to high competency. Or you could have very effective training that can accelerate that process by many years. If you can properly convey the core aspects of what needs to be done and how it needs to be done and principles that need to be followed, so that you can bridge the gaps in intuitive decisions that you can make without going through every last little step.
Yeah.
So, I think it's very, very important that we have developed training that does a few things. It very innovatively and in an exciting way, in a realistic way, delivers the information in a way that's not stagnant, monotone, and lacking dynamism, right? We bring special effects, we bring lighting, we bring excellent sound, we bring a unique environment. And even when they're online courses, we make them interesting with information that you haven't heard before in the standard type of a schmo. As I've been speaking today, I want to bring ideas that challenge the norm and challenge the monolith that has caused problems in the past and attacks the new problems that we've recently experienced with solutions. And
Okay.
we don't have all the solutions. We want to bring the people to the table with interaction in the class that says, what have you experienced in your area? And what have you experienced in your area? And what were those solutions? And can that benefit the entire class and be added to the knowledge base that takes us from class session to class session to class session? It should improve with every class, period. We want to put people as realistically in an operational setting as possible with our SOC and NOC type workshops. We know that modern utility and control and SCADA systems are managed through network interfaces. So we want to put you in the situation where you are seeing these challenges and these risks manifest and get you in a situation where you're actually managing those risks and defeating those risks and training towards that in a way that you're going to recognize back at your facility rather than just reading it in a handout.
Thank you.
So, these are some of the goals that we're doing. Yeah. And we have NERC SIP courses as well.
Yep. Llewelyn?
Yes, I want to ask Michael. First, I'd like to congratulate him on how extraordinarily well he's explained this and how articulate he is.
Oh, thank you.
And anybody who can bring in the idea of bills of attainder into a discussion of electricity deserves all of our attention. However, as you're around the grid, as you know a lot of the grid, you must form opinions. And we seem to, on this program, to have basically two opinions that have evolved over many broadcasts. Those who believe the grid should be so responsive that it can be broken into defensive entities, John Wellinghoff, for example, into defensive entities when attacked. Microgrids come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And those who seem to believe the entire structure of the grid needs to be hardened against these attacks. Do you see a favored way of defending the grid?
Well, there are definitely two schools of thought that don't often speak together, but they often should. And that is the logical vulnerabilities of the grid versus the physical vulnerabilities of the grid. And there are different, for instance, NERC standards that treat either the SIP standards or critical infrastructure protection that are mostly going to address the logical, even though they do have physical security and other standards in there as well. And then the operational type standards that also say, these will guide the operational as if you didn't have computers per se, and how you would do that. For instance, you could have a talk about in the physical more about islanding and how if you would have an excursion, the excursion could only proceed so far based on the structure of the island, as opposed to taking out an entire line and taking the whole thing out because you didn't have those stopgap structures in place. On the other hand, you could have this the conversation about the logical attacks and hacking and of the control systems, SCADA systems, and so on, and how that's probably the more important risk, because logically speaking, from a laptop in Russia, I could take over large areas and shut them down, or compromise a water plant, or many things that are absolutely possible there. But in the two schools of thought, I think that in many ways they're equally important, because the end result damage is the same, and you have to cover all bases. One thing I like to say to my wife, and when we have arguments, is I said, darling, just because one thing is true does not mean something else is not also true. One does not preclude the other. So can we basically talk about both at the same time? People don't normally want to do that. And it's normally black on one side, white on the other side. In this case, as in others, both things are true simultaneously that need to be attacked in multiple dimensions in order to come up with a successful result. Because ignoring one creates the problem for the other.
Makes sense. John?
And I think, Michael, when you put the numbers to what you've done, you will save the industry billions of dollars. So everything comes down to a business model. It's not just what's right and what's wrong. The question is, how will your technology increase the efficiency and in the same time save different kinds of money that can be utilized to upgrade the grid? So you bring to the table a savings, a value proposition that's very, very important going forward in the future.
It's true. To have a different conversation, I'll have a different conversation with a COO than I will have with a CFO or with a CEO. To the CFO, I'm going to be talking dollars in financial risk that is presented by how compliant you are, what you do, and what your operations have to happen, because it's then in the loss of assets that your company could suffer a great financial loss. And that's what he's motivated by, right? But to the chief operational officer, his heart is in how well things operate and so on and so forth. And do we lose business continuity, resilience, as Llewelyn was saying, and so on and so forth. To the CEO, he's normally worried about what his other CEO buddies have done or what they've spent money on and what I can get away with and how I can just keep the company most profitable. So we have different conversation of what the risk actually is. But you're right. I think the numbers at the end of the day, being able to say, can I measure? Can I measure to the tune of, am I 90% compliant with what we're supposed to do? Or even, am I in sequence? Compliance is a weird word. With the policies and procedures that we have in place as a company, forget compliance altogether for a minute. Are we doing that? Are we able to measure that and see how well we are doing is the intelligence that should guide your decisions. Sometimes I have an issue with only talking about lessons learned, because the lessons learned of yesterday are already moldy and old. What about the lessons we need to learn for today? Are you up to date on what we need to know now in order to prevent problems of the future and manage those risks? So I think, though, that the measurement of what we do and how we do it, history is great, trends are great, and all this kind of thing. But we need to be able to be up to date and manage with numbers and with activities, what we are doing and how well we are doing in order to prevent issues in the future. Now with the pandemic, I think we've thrown a wrench in the works, really, for the value of a lot of historical data that we already have. It's an interesting time, because that which applied yesterday with the advent of different events and with different people and with a different skill set are going to be bringing the need for innovation that supplants the historical facts that we know.
Yeah, very good. Very good, Michael. Give us a sense for, and I think that, we all probably know the answer to this, but give us a sense of, a lot of people are, half empty kind of glass people. A lot of people are half full kind of glass people. Security seems to be, is always a challenge, has been a challenge for as long as I've been in the industry, 40 years. Now we're heading to Internet of Things and more digitalization into billions of devices, and that only creates more complexity and difficulty on delivering resiliency and not being hacked at all. Give us a sense for, in your experience and your thoughts. I mean, can we really stay ahead of the game? Can we manage this? Is it just having a rigor and a focus and a dedication and the right bodies in the right places, or does it require magic that we still don't know about?
One of the most interesting statistics I ever heard was from the CIO of Schlumberger. And he says, remember that with everything that we ever do for security, all the billions and billions, possibly trillions of dollars that we spend trying to make our organizations secure on our networks, we are at very most 40% effective. And let that sink in a minute. With everything we ever do, the maximum that we can possibly achieve is 40% efficiency, and some would argue less. All right. So I think the beginning of this conversation, especially being a compliance-oriented type of person, is so we have to talk about the fact that 60% vulnerability is a fact and will remain so. So when somebody starts to tell me, can we ever get hardened to the point where we ever have problems? I say, not just no, hell no. That's not going to be the reality of the situation. The question is, have you done all you can to get to that 40% and try to push that needle past 40 and better and better and better? Yeah. And it goes to organizational maturity and lots that you can do. But don't fool yourself that it will be perfect, because we are a long way from that. And in the race where the black hats and the white hats are constantly trying to vie against each other, and for every solution you come up with, the black hats create more problems. Well, the black hats are winning. That's all there is to it. And we need to make more progress with that. So you do absolutely everything you can, do every preventive measure that you possibly can, and also understand, back to the point of resiliency, but you will have crashes, you will have these incursions, you will have excursions, you will have breaches. And when you do, don't fool yourself that you need to have the plan in place to rectify those issues, because they are a fact of life.
Right.
Yeah. Michael, we can take a lot from the airline industry. That is one of the impressive things of the airline industry, is that we know there will be down planes, and the question is, what do we always ask and what can we learn? So the progress of the airline industry and the safety of the airline industry, drawing an analogy, has been that if there's wind shear, now we have an instrument for that. If there's pilot error, now we have an instrument for that. So what happens is that people understand that it cannot be completely 100%.
Right.
But we also depend upon technology to tell us, looking into the future, that although this happened on the grid, we are to a point now where we can fix that. So to what extent do we balance technology with good old historical knowledge that you talked about? That is, when people really, really retired, the best and the brightest. How do you balance that when we think that technology itself will solve the problem? But in the airline industry, it has solved a lot of the problems. So they have gone to the fact that flying is very, very, very safe now, which was not true, right, 6 years ago. Llewelyn is a pilot. Maybe he wants to speak to this. So my question is, as we think about the grid, how do we think about in terms of what the airline industry has done, assuring us that when that crashes will happen, but the technology can also help us out?
Well, take your example on wind shear before we talk about the grid. The example on wind shear says, okay, so when a plane crashed and killed a lot of people due to wind shear, now we gathered that data and we gathered that information, and now we know how to protect better against wind shear. But I put you the point, we had wind shear before the crash. You just didn't have the motivation to spend the money to prevent against that problem until you were motivated by a lot of death. You could have done it before, you just didn't. The answer in innovation is not necessarily to wait till there is such a bad disaster that we are motivated then to go find the answers and get the data. The data is available if the motivation is there. So how about we dedicate at least some sort of a budget for innovation that is dedicated to simulating the problems that some very smart people dream up that have never happened yet, bringing that era of unknown risk into the known prior to it actually happening. Now, a lot of people don't find value in that. CEOs often don't. Why should we spend money on problems that have never happened when they may never happen, right? But we can't have that attitude. To some degree, we have to at least put a portion of what we know might happen, from especially people that raise their hand and say, I see an issue, I see a possibility of disaster or danger here, and someone actually listening and saying, you know what, we're not going to bet the farm on it, but I will put a certain budget that we have set aside to investigate these sort of things, because just like playing the odds in Vegas, this might pay off for us in a very, very big way that we wouldn't have these issues before. The only problem, like I said, is you can't prove that dollars that you spend there are entirely wasted on problems that will never happen, and that's the challenge.
I think that's very well
right. We always put up the stop. We always put the stop sign up after the accident.
That's right.
And there's a certain inevitability to that. I would say that one of the things and one of the lessons we can possibly learn from aircraft, not aviation so much as the aircraft themselves, is the value of redundancy. Airplanes are loaded with redundant systems. Even single-engine airplanes the doctors and lawyers fly around in on Saturday afternoons have a number of redundant systems. It is an essential part of the construction of an aircraft, of that setup, of that plan, that systems will be redundant. Now, when you get to airliners and many lives involved, the redundancies increase dramatically. They produce their own problems, but they're there and they save lives. How much redundancy can we afford to put on the electric system? And is it even feasible? What will you have replicated? Will you have double transformers, double lines? You're talking about not maybe billions, but even trillions of dollars when you attack the entire electric system and try to build a secondary redundant one. So you have to find difficult, dangerous parts of it and make those redundant and defensible.
Yeah.
One of the redundancy issues right now is in maintenance. One of the power shortages we just had in ERCOT was that so many systems were shut down for maintenance that it created a scarcity, right? And you have to ask yourself, well, how do you solve that when these power systems are privately owned? They're privately owned, but it's a public problem. So one of the things we need to put our heads to is, when systems are down, what replaces them, and how do we maintain stability on the grid with more redundant systems that are available? I mean, there's these things we used to call spinning reserve and these constructs that were supposed to take the place of these down systems, peaking plants and whatnot. But where do they come from? I mean, that is exactly what you said, exactly right, Llewelyn. Where does the money come from to build up these redundancies that cause these issues when systems go down?
And as you said, Michael, so correctly, there are acts of God. You might take the low level of water reserves in the dams in the West, which is causing a very tight electric supply system and almost definitely will lead to blackouts as the summer progresses. That is essentially an act of God, or it might have had some human authorship, but not directly blamable on a utility company.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I unfortunately have to cut us short because we are over time, and we could talk to Michael for days about cybersecurity. And it's a very interesting topic and a fascinating challenge. I invite you all to connect with Michael and come and take a course from him at Texas State University in our new Network Operations Center, Security Operations Center Training Lab as part of CIEDAR. Looking forward to.
You won't be bored. You won't be sorry.
So I'm going to say goodbye now to everyone, and thank you very much. We'll stop recording here. It's been enlightening.
Thank you all very much. And Michael, it's an honor and a delight to meet you. You're a very, very interesting man. And John, as always, it is a pleasure to hear your
Great
views.
talking with you.
I hope to meet
Absolutely, Llewelyn. You are my bright, shining star, without a doubt.
You are my silver-tongued orator.
And I look forward
to your views.
I look forward to buying you with some regret dinner and just down.
Llewelyn, where do you live? Where do you reside?
My teeth when I pay.
Where do I live?